It was a sunny Monday morning, and there I was sitting in the back of a black cab, navigating the rush hour traffic through the streets of London. After many months of applications and interviews, today was going to be the first day of my corporate career. But in the midst of all the anticipation, there was also apprehension. After all, I'd never held a proper job before. How's I going to manage in a professional working environment? How would my teammates receive me? And most importantly, would I still be able to party 3 nights a week like I used to at university? Fortunately, I was going to be joining a global firm who thought about all my needs, all my requirements. The building itself was state-of-the-art, fantastic access, and even my workstation, I had one of those fancy desks that moves up and down. Less than a year later, I'd already left my dream job because it just didn't feel like a good fit. And what I started to realize was that whilst many of the companies I worked for had a positive attitude towards diversity and inclusion, the focus was still very much on the diversity aspect more than the inclusion. Which makes a lot of sense, right? Because diversity is easier to measure because it's about bringing different pieces around the table. Inclusion, on the other hand, forces you to think about how do I get all of these pieces to fit together. In my current role as an inclusion specialist, I support organizations in creating strategies and processes to help them attract and retain diverse talent. And this has become an important topic for the leading companies in the world. And we have seen a lot of progress in addressing historical inequalities, but there still remains a lot of room for improvement. I've got an infographic here which highlights some of the challenges. So if you compare FTSE 100 boardrooms to the general UK population, the numbers are a little bit concerning. So if you look at gender representation, for example, in the boardroom, 9%. In the general UK population, 51%. So you can already see the mismatch. Same again with people of color in the boardroom, 2%. In the general population, they make up 14%. People belonging to the LGBTQ plus community in the boardroom, 0% declared. In the general population, it's 6%. So I guess the big question I'd like to answer today is, how can we take a more inclusive approach to the attraction and retention of diverse talent? And kind of stepping back to, when I started my own career, my focus was on becoming the best software developer, software programmer in the world. Because that's what I was trained to be, right? That's what I studied. But what I started to realize was, in addition to being good at your job, there was also an additional resource that I needed to develop. And that resource is something that I call social capital. And you probably use this currency in your day-to-day life without even realizing it. I'm gonna give you a quick example. Who here has ever bought any flat pack furniture, for example, from IKEA? You know those things you have to put together? Yeah? Cool. And who in here sucks at DIY as much as I do? Yeah? A few people owning up. Cool. And so wouldn't it be nice to have a friend or a neighbor come along, if you're as bad as me, come along and help you to put together that brand new shelf? It'd be nice, right? Or if you're driving to this conference, for example, and you don't know where to park your car, wouldn't it be nice to be able to call the organizer, hey, Julius, where's the best place to park my car? Makes life easier, right? And that's exactly what social capital is. Social capital gives you access to information, to skills, and to resources simply based on the relationships you've developed. And I've got an infographic here again, which sort of highlights an important fact. So there's a study that shows that the average person has around 150 important relationships. So that's sort of their social capital representation. People from a disabled background, in comparison, have 25 of those relationships. And the same trend can be seen across the other protected groups. So going back to my experience when I stepped into corporate, I had no prior existing connections, with people at blue chip companies because A, I'm a first generation immigrant, and B, I belong to that second group, people with a disabled background. And so for me, I had to kind of make it in there, figure things out for myself, ask a lot of questions, make a lot of mistakes before I finally started to understand how to navigate corporate culture. Wouldn't it have been much easier if I had those existing connections prior to joining the company? Possibly. And I'm not here to say that the only way to succeed in a career or in any environment is purely based on the people that you know. But it sure makes life a hell of a lot easier, right? So how can we truly say that we're building an inclusive culture if there are unwritten laws for success that are accessible to some demographics or some segments of the population, but not others? Yeah. And it's not just about the relationships a candidate might have prior to joining an organization. Every single day we're making hiring mistakes because we don't see things based on how they are, but we see things based on how we are. I'm going to give you a quick example. So picture the scene with me. A recruiter rings up a candidate for a telephone interview. Hello, could I speak to Joanne, please? Yeah, it's Joanne speaking. Could I speak to Joanne, please? Yep, it's Joanne speaking. I'm sorry, it's a terrible line. Please could I speak to Joanne? It's still Joanne speaking. Meet Joanne. My friend Joanne happens to be transgender, and so for her, one of her biggest challenges is her voice match, because it doesn't necessarily correlate with somebody called Joanne. She has a deeper voice, right? And we all have these unconscious biases, and I'm even going to take a moment to call myself out on something that I did recently. So I posted a video online. I thought it was a good video. I was expecting really good feedback. But one of the points that I got back was, hey, Winston, for somebody who labels themselves as the inclusion specialist, quote unquote, it's interesting that you forgot to include text captions for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Right. Complete oversight by me, but again, a confronting reminder that we all have a responsibility to continue to embrace people from all walks of life, not just people who are like us. Yeah. And it's also important to note that some of us accrue privilege simply based on the intersecting categories in which we're positioned. How much better does my friend Joanne have to be compared to the Caucasian male candidate from Oxford to get that job? How much better does Winston have to be? How can we ensure that we're embracing all people in our hiring processes? And the other thing to note is, it's not just about thinking the hiring processes or pre-onboarding. An important point to note is once you have your candidate in the company, to infuse a culture, a sense of psychological safety into that workplace. Or perhaps some of you have been guilty of sending across such emails. As per my last email, right? And we're all guilty of sending out passive-aggressive communications from time to time, right? Especially bad when I'm tired, when I'm stressed, and actually especially when I'm hungry. Just let's not email each other. But it's important to note that, that communication could be having a damaging effect on somebody else, right? Because think about it, going back to my junior experience joining a corporation, if I was constantly getting emails like these, what would that do for my self-esteem? What would it do for my ability to build relationships with my colleagues? Would it make me want to be more bold and willing to take risks? Probably not, right? And what about workplace banter, workplace humor? Do we sometimes take it too far with the jokes? Remember, what might be funny for me might be having a damaging effect on somebody else. Yeah. And as I begin to wrap up, what I want to do is take you through a couple of tools, a couple of platforms which I've come across, which I think would start to address some of these inclusion questions that I've raised today. So on your top right, you've got a tool by a company called Holaroo. The tool is called Be Ready. And so what that does is it's particularly aimed at graduates. So when graduates are about to join a big corporation, they'll be given access to Be Ready, which just looks like a web platform. And that will give them access to company information, resources, but most importantly, the people in that company, the people they'll be working with. And I love this tool because I see it as one of the ways we can start to build social capital and build up those relationships prior to onboarding, which would have been super beneficial for me when I started working. The next one to the right of that is something called the Harvard IAT, which is the Implicit Association Test. Some of you might have heard of it, but it's an incredible tool which takes you through a survey and allows you to start exposing or to start identifying some of your own unconscious biases. Because remember, we all have them. We all have these stereotypes. Yeah? And thirdly, which is not appearing on the slide, is a tool called Grammarly. And what Grammarly does is it does its email sentiment analysis of the tone of your written communications. And actually, it gives it an emotional rating. So you write an email, and it gives you a rating, for example, angry or, pessimistic or frustrated. And that way you can start to become more aware of those passive-aggressive messages that we exchange with each other. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but hopefully a starting point for conversation and further exploration. I want to live in a world that is truly inclusive, and I'd like to invite you to help me create this world, whether it's for the first-generation immigrant, the transgender person, or the left-handed introverted vegan, right? And at this point, you might be thinking, hey, Winston, this all sounds really good, but how can I help? In every situation, whether it's business or in life, I would love for you to remember to ask yourself this one simple question. Who am I excluding?